Let me ask you something. Have you ever opened your bank account app, not to check your balance, but just to close it as fast as possible? Like you already know what you're going to see, and looking at it only makes things worse. Or maybe you've been at the grocery store, standing in the cereal aisle, spending a full 30 seconds deciding whether the name brand version is worth the extra $2. Not because $2 is a lot of money in isolation, but because when you're counting every dollar, $2 actually means something. That's where most people live. Not in crisis, not in a breakdown, just in this constant, low-level financial dread that follows you around every single day. The kind that makes you a little less present at dinner, a little more irritable in traffic, a little more anxious when your phone rings and you don't recognize the number. And here's what's interesting. There's a specific dollar amount that turns that noise off. Not forever, not like some magic trick, but in a way that's real, measurable, and backed by data. That amount is $10,000. I've spent a lot of time looking at the psychology and the math behind why certain savings milestones create such dramatic changes in people's lives, and the $10,000 mark is one of the most fascinating and most misunderstood thresholds I've come across. Because the shift that happens when you get there, most people never see it coming. Here's the thing most people get completely wrong about saving money. They think it's a discipline problem. Like if you're broke or stressed about your finances, it's because you lack willpower. You ordered too much takeout. You bought something you didn't need. And if you could just white-knuckle your way through a few months of extreme budgeting, you'd finally get ahead. That's the version of the story most financial content pushes, and it makes people feel terrible about themselves without actually helping them. But here's what actually happens when someone is living paycheck to paycheck. It's not a discipline problem, it's a cognitive load problem. Right now, according to PNC Bank's 2025 Financial Wellness in the Workplace report, 67% of American workers say they're living paycheck to paycheck, up from 63% in 2024. And when the Federal Reserve published its survey of household economics in May 2025, they found that 18% of adults couldn't cover an emergency expense of even $100 using only their savings. Not $1,000, not $500, $100. Think about what that number means for a second. $100, that's a copay. That's a parking ticket. That's a minor car expense. And nearly 1 in 9 Americans is $100 problem away from financial stress. That's not people being irresponsible. That's people being completely exhausted. Here's a concept from psychology that explains what's actually going on. Cognitive bandwidth. Think of your brain like a phone with limited processing power. When you're constantly calculating whether you can afford things, not just big things, but small things, like whether to grab lunch or pack it, whether to fill up the gas tank now or stretch it another 2 days, all of that calculation is eating up your processing power. Researchers who have studied this found something striking. Financial scarcity forces your brain to focus so intensely on short-term survival that it has significantly less capacity left for long-term thinking, creative problem-solving, or emotional regulation. You're not bad at planning, you're just running on empty before the day even starts. Now, most people assume that building savings is about learning to spend less. And yes, spending less matters, but here's the thing most people miss. The biggest benefit of $10,000 in savings isn't what you do with the money, it's what the money does to your brain. When you have $10,000 sitting in a savings account, your brain stops treating every single day like a survival exercise. The background stress doesn't vanish completely, but it drops from a constant alarm to something you can actually manage. And that shift from survival mode to something closer to strategy mode changes every single decision you make, how you negotiate, how you sleep, how you show up at work, how you respond when something goes wrong. Most people who've successfully built that cushion will tell you the same thing. The money mattered less than what the money did to how they thought about everything else. And that's what I want to walk you through today. Not some generic spend less, save more advice, but the actual, specific, documented changes that happen across different areas of your life the second you cross that $10,000 line.
But here's where it gets really interesting. These changes don't just show up in your bank account. They show up in your body, your career, your relationships, and some of them start happening before you even spend a single dollar of what you've saved. Let's start somewhere unexpected: your sleep. I know that might sound like a stretch. What does saving money have to do with how well you sleep? But the research here is actually pretty clear. A 2025 study published in Sleep Medicine found that people experiencing financial hardship were more than twice as likely to suffer from insomnia compared to those without financial stress. And separate research on cortisol, your body's primary stress hormone, confirms that financial anxiety keeps cortisol elevated at night, which is essentially your brain refusing to power down because it still perceives a threat. Think about what that means in practical terms. If you're sleeping worse because of money stress, you're making worse decisions the next day. Your emotional regulation weakens, your patience gets shorter, your performance at work suffers, and the worse you perform and the fewer opportunities you take, the worse the financial stress gets. It's a cycle, and it has nothing to do with your character and everything to do with your nervous system doing exactly what it's designed to do. Here's what changes when you cross that $10,000 line. Your brain finally has evidence that you can handle something going wrong. That evidence, concrete, in your bank account, is what starts to lower that cortisol baseline. You still have the same bills, the same job, the same rent, but your nervous system starts operating differently at night because the threat level has actually measurably decreased. Most people who hit that milestone for the first time describe the same thing. They sleep differently. Not perfectly, just differently. And that's more significant than it sounds. But here's where it gets really interesting, because this is where most financial advice completely misses the point. $10,000 doesn't just protect you from emergencies, it fundamentally changes how you experience them. Here's a real example. The average car repair in the U.S. right now costs $838, according to 2025 data from Kelley Blue Book. Major repairs, a transmission and engine issue, can easily run $4,000 to $5,000. And according to a study from AAA, about 64 million American drivers, roughly 1 in 3, would be unable to pay for unexpected car repairs without going into debt. So picture two people, same job, same neighborhood, same car, same problem. The check engine light comes on. Person A has $400 in savings. That check engine light isn't just a car problem. It's a potential credit card charge they might not be able to pay down for months. It's an anxiety spiral that starts before they even know what's wrong. It's 3 days of stress on top of everything else they're already carrying. And that stress, it's going to affect their work, their relationships, their sleep, all of it.
Person B has $10,000 saved. The same check engine light comes on. Their thought process is, annoying, I'll take it in tomorrow. That's the whole thing. Because they know that whatever it costs, $400 or $1,500 or even $2,500, they can handle it without their entire month falling apart. Same car, same problem. Completely different lived experience. And here's the part that matters practically. Person A is more likely to delay the repair because they're hoping it goes away, which often turns a $500 fix into a $3,000 one. Person B handles it immediately because they can afford to. So the cushion doesn't just reduce stress, it often ends up saving money directly. This is what financial security actually does in the real world. It doesn't make bad things stop happening. It changes how bad things affect you and what you're able to do about them. Now let's talk about something that almost nobody addresses in personal finance content, but that affects almost everyone who's been in a financially stressed position: what money stress does to your professional life. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, there's a ceiling on how much professional risk you're willing to take. You can't afford to push back on a bad work situation because you can't survive 2 months without a paycheck if things go sideways. So you accept conditions you shouldn't. You stay in roles past the point where you should have left. You don't ask for the raise you deserve because the fear of creating tension outweighs the potential upside. Do you recognize that pattern? Most people do when they stop to think about it. What changes when you have $10,000 saved is subtle but real. You're negotiating from a slightly different position, not because you're planning to quit tomorrow, but because you know you could survive a few months if you had to. That internal shift in leverage, even when it's quiet, tends to show up in how you carry yourself in professional situations. There's actually research on this from negotiation science. People with better alternatives consistently get better outcomes. $10,000 isn't a lot of money in absolute terms, but as a professional alternative, as the thing that lets you say, I'll walk away from a bad deal because I have some margin, it's real. And here's what that translates to in concrete numbers. If that financial confidence gives you the ability to negotiate a $5,000 annual raise you otherwise would have avoided pursuing, and you get it, your $10,000 in savings has already returned a 50% gain before you've spent a dollar of it. But here's the part that most people don't talk about, and I think this might be the most important thing in this video. The biggest change $10,000 creates isn't protection from emergencies, it's access to opportunity. Think about how many decisions in your life require money up front. A professional certification that could significantly advance your career but costs $2,000. A health issue you've been putting off addressing because you weren't sure what you could afford. A minor home repair you've been delaying that's slowly turning into a major one. An investment in tools or software that could meaningfully improve your business or freelance income. Without savings, all of these decisions get made the same way. You don't make them because you can't. The opportunity comes and you watch it go. With $10,000, you start being able to actually engage with your own life. You can fix problems before they compound. You can invest in things that return more than they cost. You can take small, calculated risks that have the potential to move your situation forward. Most people frame savings as being about security, and it is, but it's also about mobility, your ability to move towards something, not just defend against something.
Now, I want to get real about something that most financial content either ignores or oversimplifies. Getting to $10,000 is genuinely hard for a lot of people, not because of bad habits, but because of math. The average American salary is around $65,470 before taxes, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. After you account for taxes, housing, food, transportation, and healthcare, all of which have risen significantly faster than wages, a lot of households don't have much margin left. Inflation grew 24.6% between August 2020 and August 2025. That's not a rounding error. And yet, and this is important, $10,000 is still achievable for most people who approach it with a system rather than willpower. Here's what the research on savings behavior actually shows. The people who successfully build emergency funds don't do it by cutting everything and living austerely for 6 months. That approach works for about 3 weeks before people burn out and go back to their default patterns. What actually works is smaller, automatic contributions that eventually stop feeling like a decision. If you set up an automatic transfer of $200 a month into a high-yield savings account, and in early 2026 those accounts are paying around 4 to 4.5% APY, you'd reach $10,000 in about 4 years with some interest included. Bump that to $300 a month and you're there in under 3 years. At $500 a month, it's about a year and a half. None of those numbers require a dramatic lifestyle overhaul. They require one setup decision and then getting out of your own way. The behavioral economics research here is consistent. Removing decisions from the saving process is what makes it sustainable. When the transfer is automatic, you never sit down each month and decide whether to save. The decision is already made. And when the decision is already made, you actually stick with it. Here's something that might put that in perspective. The personal savings rate in the U.S. right now is about 4.4% according to 2025 data, near historic lows, which means the vast majority of people are not building savings in any meaningful, consistent way, which means that anyone who automates even $200 a month and stays consistent is already doing something that most Americans aren't. Not because they earn more, not because they got lucky, but because they made one system-level decision and followed through. Let me give you one more angle on this before we zoom out to the bigger picture, something called the mental math tax. Have you ever noticed how exhausted you feel at the end of a day when you've had to make a lot of small, stressful decisions? That's decision fatigue, and for people living without savings, that experience happens constantly around money. Every financial decision runs through the same mental process. Can I afford this? What does this do to the rest of my month? What if something else comes up? Multiply that by 30, 40, 50 small decisions per day, and by evening, you're mentally depleted from things that had nothing to do with your actual goals or your actual work. When you have $10,000 saved, roughly 90% of those micro calculations become irrelevant. A $55 grocery run isn't a stressful decision. A $40 urgent care copay isn't a mini financial crisis. A birthday gift for someone you care about isn't something you dread for a week beforehand. That mental energy doesn't just disappear, it gets redirected to actual problems worth solving, to longer-term thinking, to the kind of focus that can actually move your career and your life forward. That redirection might be the single most underrated benefit of financial stability, and it's one most people don't even notice until they're on the other side of it. Here's where I want to zoom out and look at this over a longer time frame, because the $10,000 milestone matters, but what matters even more is what it sets in motion over the years that follow.
Picture two people, both 30, both living in the same kind of city, earning roughly similar incomes, dealing with the same economic pressures. Inflation, housing costs, the general financial weight of being an adult in 2025. Person A never quite builds the cushion, not because they're irresponsible, but because something always comes up. An unexpected expense derails a good stretch of saving. A hard month wipes out the progress. And so they spend their 30s doing the same mental math they did in their 20s. Still avoiding the doctor because they're not sure what it'll cost. Still staying in a job past the point they should have left. Still one bad month away from a problem that sets them back by 6 months. By the time they're 40, they're exhausted. Not just financially. The chronic, low-grade stress of financial instability has accumulated over a decade. It's affected their health outcomes. It's affected their relationships. It's affected the professional decisions they made or didn't make because they didn't have the margin to take risks. The math of their life has been running at a deficit they never quite saw, not in their bank account, but in their energy, their confidence, and their options. Person B builds the $10,000 cushion. Doesn't do anything dramatic, just sets up a $250 automatic transfer and lets it build over 3.5 years. When they hit the milestone, they don't throw a party, but something shifts. They finally address a health situation they've been putting off. They take a certification that moves their career forward. They negotiate the next job offer instead of just accepting the first number. By 40, the gap between these two people isn't primarily financial. It's the gap between someone who spent a decade playing defense and someone who gradually, quietly built the ability to play offense. Here's what the data actually shows about this. According to the Federal Reserve's 2024 survey data, Americans who report having emergency savings are significantly more likely to also report better overall financial confidence, better physical health outcomes, and notably higher retirement savings rates. Not because $10,000 directly creates all of those things, but because the habits, the margin, and the mindset it builds tend to compound over time. Most people who build that first cushion go on to build a second one, then a third. Then they start seriously looking at investing, not because they suddenly became financially sophisticated, but because they finally have the mental space to think beyond the immediate. The trajectory changes, and it changes in ways that are almost impossible to fully see until you're standing on the other side of it. So here's where I want to leave you. $10,000 is not a finish line. It won't make your life perfect, it won't eliminate financial stress entirely, and anyone who tells you that hitting a savings milestone is all you need to do hasn't been honest with you. But here's what it is. It's the first real, concrete proof you give yourself that you can operate differently, that you're not just surviving your financial life, you're starting to build some control over it. The things we talked about today, sleeping better, making clearer decisions, carrying yourself differently at work, having access to opportunities you would have otherwise missed, none of that requires you to be wealthy. None of it requires a 6-figure income or a financial windfall or some stroke of luck. It requires $10,000 in a savings account. One number,
One threshold, one line that separates constantly reacting from occasionally choosing. You get to decide when you cross it. You get to decide how fast and what that looks like given your specific situation, your income, your obligations. Nobody outside of you can make that decision.
But what I hope you take from this is simple. The shift that happens at $10,000 is real. It's documented in the data. It shows up in people's health, their sleep, their careers, their relationships, and it's available to almost anyone who's willing to be consistent long enough to get there. The question isn't whether this would change things for you. For most people, it would, significantly. The question is when you decide to start.